violation.
Not in your HOA. This is my land.
What? This is private property.
My property.
No!
The coffee was still hot when I saw her coming up the driveway, 7:43 on a Tuesday morning, and this woman in a white pantsuit was marching toward my grandfather's farmhouse like she owned the place. She didn't knock, didn't wave, just stopped at the bottom of my porch steps with a clipboard pressed against her chest and a smile that never touched her eyes. I opened the screen door, mug in hand, and waited. "Mr. Mitchell," her voice had that practiced cheerfulness that corporate trainers teach, bright on the surface, steel underneath. "I'm Karen Westfield, president of the Meadowbrook HOA. I wanted to introduce myself and discuss a few concerns we have regarding your property." I'd been in Pine Ridge for exactly 3 weeks. Retired from 30 years of corporate warfare in Chicago, moved into the farmhouse my grandfather built in 1952, and spent most of my time fixing the porch swing and learning how to sleep without traffic noise. The last thing I wanted was whatever this woman was selling. "Concerns," I repeated. She clicked her pen, one of those expensive metal ones, and consulted her clipboard. "Your vegetable garden violates our Landscape Ordinance Section 4.2, subsection C. Visible produce gardens must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee and installed behind appropriate screening. You'll need to submit plans for review." I glanced at the tomato plants I'd put in last week, 6 plants in neat rows, same spot my grandfather had used for 60 years. "Your pickup truck is parked in clear view of Meadowbrook residents." Another pen click. "Section 7.1 prohibits work vehicles or agging automobiles from being visible from common areas. You'll need to park it behind your barn or purchase a cover." The truck was a 1987 Chevy, primer gray, ran like a dream. My grandfather's truck. I'd learned to drive in that truck. And finally, Karen's smile tightened another degree. "Your barn requires immediate repainting. The current, rustic appearance creates visual blight for our community. We recommend colonial blue or weathered gray, both approved colors available at Sherwin-Williams. I can email you the paint codes." I sipped my coffee. It had gone lukewarm. "You done?" "I've prepared an introductory packet with all our guidelines." She pulled a thick manila folder from under her clipboard, held it out. "The violations I mentioned need to be addressed within 30 days to avoid penalties." I didn't take the folder. "You're not in your HOA." Her hand froze halfway to me. "I'm sorry." I said, "I'm not in your HOA." Karen's professional mask flickered. She lowered the folder, tucked it back under her clipboard with precise movements. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand you may not have reviewed the covenants when you inherited this property, but Meadowbrook's boundaries were surveyed and filed with the county in 2016. Your eastern property line places you within our jurisdiction." She pulled out a map, unfolded it, and jabbed her finger at a circled section. "This is you, this is us, same zone." I looked at the map for maybe 3 seconds. Cheap printer paper, Google Maps screenshot with hand-drawn boundaries. "No." "Excuse me." My grandfather bought this land in 1952. 47 acres, free and clear, the deeds in the county records. "I'm not in your HOA, Mrs. Westfield, and I'm not going to be." Her smile finally died. "The surveyor confirmed the boundaries when we filed our incorporation documents. If you'd like to dispute that, you're welcome to retain an attorney, but I assure you the county has already." I closed the door. Through the window, I watched her stand there for a solid 30 seconds, folder pressed to her chest, staring at the closed door like it had personally insulted her. Then she turned and walked back to her car, a white Lexus SUV with the Meadowbrook logo on the rear window, and drove away. I figured that was the end of it. 3 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door at 6:15 p.m. Young guy, maybe late 20s, apologetic eyes, and a notebook he kept checking like he'd forgotten why he was there. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Deputy Carver. We received a harassment complaint filed by a Karen Westfield. She states you threatened her during a property dispute on Monday." I set down the wood plane I'd been using on the porch rail. "Threatened her?" "Yes, sir. Did you have an interaction with Mrs. Westfield on the morning of May 8th?" She came to my house uninvited and told me to paint my barn. I told her I wasn't in her HOA, then I closed the door. Carver wrote this down, nodding. Did you use any threatening language, make any physical gestures? No. Did you raise your voice or? Deputy, I kept my tone level. She walked onto my property without permission, made demands, and I politely ended the conversation. That's it. He flipped his notebook shut, looked relieved. Okay, I'll note that in my report, just maybe keep your distance from Mrs. Westfield going forward, all right. HOA disputes can get messy. After he left, I walked out to the garden. Something felt off. I stood there in the fading light until I spotted it. The survey stakes my grandfather had driven in 1952, solid iron markers he'd painted orange so you could see them in the tall grass. Someone had moved them. Not much, maybe 6 inches east, but enough that I noticed. And in the soft dirt near the tomatoes, fresh boot prints. Size 7, maybe 8, women's hiking boots, expensive tread pattern. I looked across the clearing toward Meadowbrook. Couldn't see much through the trees, just the roof of what I assumed was Karen's house, grey shingles catching the last of the sunlight. The next week brought 2 more police visits. Different deputies each time, same apologetic routine. Noise violation at 6 p.m. I'd been running a circular saw, building a new chicken coop. Aggressive dog complaint. I didn't own a dog. Each time I showed them my grandfather's deed. Each time they took notes and told me to try to work it out. The 4th time Deputy Carver showed up, I'd had enough. How much is she paying you to do this? I asked. He flushed. Sir, I'm just responding to. I know, I'm calling a surveyor. It cost $3,200. The surveyor's name was Mitchell, no relation, and he spent 2 full days mapping my property with GPS equipment accurate to within 2 inches. Karen watched from her porch both days, binoculars glinting in the sun. When Mitchell finished, he asked me to sit down before he showed me the results. The boundary line was 400 feet east of where Meadowbrook thought it was. My property included 12 acres of what Karen's HOA believed was theirs. 14 homes, the community center with its brick facade and manicured flower beds, the swimming pool I could hear kids splashing in on summer afternoons. And Karen's house, her pristine colonial with the award-winning rose garden, sitting dead center on land my grandfather had paid for 70 years ago. The developer went bankrupt in 2017, Mitchell explained, pointing at the discrepancy on his map. Looks like nobody verified the deed before they started building. This happens more than you'd think. I stared at the survey, at the red line showing what was legally mine. Karen appeared on her porch across the clearing, still holding those binoculars. I stood up, walked to my door, and locked it. Then I smiled for the first time in 3 weeks. Linda Vasquez didn't blink when I showed her the survey. She was 50-something, gray streaks in her black hair pulled back tight, and she'd been practicing property law in Tennessee for 26 years. Her office smelled like old books and strong coffee. This is going to get ugly, she said, setting the map on her desk. You know that, right? It's already ugly. She nodded, picked up her phone, and started typing. I'll draft a notice. 30 days to vacate or negotiate lease terms. Standard rate for this area would be $4,500 per month per household. You want to go that route, or you want to negotiate a buyout? Let's start with the notice. It took her 3 days to prepare 14 separate letters, each one addressed to a different homeowner, each one explaining in precise legal language that they were living on property they didn't own. I hand-delivered them on a Saturday morning, walking up to each house and dropping the envelope in the mailbox. Most people weren't home. A few watched from their windows but didn't come out. Karen's house was last. She opened the door before I reached her porch, like she'd been waiting. The letter was already in her hand. Someone must have called her. Her face cycled through emotions too fast to track. Disbelief, rage, calculation, something that might have been fear. You'll regret this, she whispered. Her hand was shaking, not from fear, from fury. I walked back to my truck and drove home. That night, the Meadowbrook Community Center lit up like Christmas. I could see it from my kitchen window, cars packed into the parking lot, every light blazing, an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, but I drove over anyway and parked across the street under a maple tree where I could watch through the windows. 60, maybe 70 people crammed inside. Karen stood at a podium, gesturing with sharp, aggressive movements. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Her body language told the story, pointing toward my property, slapping her palm on the podium, leaning forward into the microphone. The crowd mirrored her energy, heads shaking, arms crossed. One man in his late 60s, expensive watch catching the light, stood up and pointed directly toward where I sat in the darkness. The entire room turned to look. I started the truck and headed home. My mailbox was lying in the driveway, post snapped clean at the base. Someone had taken a baseball bat to it, or maybe a crowbar. The metal box was dented in on all sides, flag twisted off. I picked it up, carried it to the barn, and spent 20 minutes duct-tapping it back together. My grandfather had installed that mailbox in 1953. Rural root box, forest green, built like a tank. The post was cedar 4x4, sunk 3 feet deep. Takes real effort to break cedar like that. The next morning, I found the surveyor stakes pulled out and thrown into the creek that ran along my eastern border, all 12 of them. Mitchell had used professional-grade steel markers with GPS coordinates stamped into the caps. Expensive. Someone had walked my entire property line in the dark and ripped them out one by one. The fence was worse. 3 posts sawed through, clean cuts, not broken. Whoever did it had used a reciprocating saw, probably battery-powered, so there'd be no generator noise. The wire sagged into the tall grass. And hanging from what was left of my mailbox post, suspended by fishing line, was a dead raccoon. Stiff, probably been dead for a day or two before someone strung it up. I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Carver showed up 40 minutes later, took photos, wrote everything down in his little notebook. Could be teenagers, he offered, not meeting my eyes. You think teenagers are operating on an HOA schedule? He didn't laugh, didn't respond, just finished his report and told me he'd file it. After he left, I walked to the barn to assess the fence damage. The door was open, just a crack, maybe 3 inches. I'd locked it the night before, I was sure of it. The padlock hung from the hasp, shackle cut clean through with bolt cutters. Inside, the smell hit me first. Gasoline, strong enough to make my eyes water. A red plastic gas can lay on its side near my grandfather's workbench, cap off, empty. The concrete floor was wet with it, a dark stain spreading toward the hay bales I kept for the winter. The fumes were thick enough to taste. I backed out slowly, left the door open to air it out, and called the fire department. They came, investigated, took samples. A guy named Morrison, arson investigator with tired eyes and permanent coffee stains on his shirt, walked the barn twice before he talked to me. Someone knew what they were doing, he said. Gasoline spread in a poor pattern, concentrated near ignition sources. If they'd lit it, this whole structure would have gone up in under 5 minutes. He paused, looking at the old timber frame. You're lucky. Lucky they didn't light it, you mean? Lucky you found it first. Morrison gestured toward the cut padlock. They had to break in to do this. Someone wanted access bad enough to risk being seen. Can you prove who did it? No witnesses, no cameras. He glanced toward Meadowbrook, visible through the trees. You got problems with the HOA. You could say that. He wrote something in his report, closed his notebook. Get cameras, good ones, and maybe sleep lighter for a while. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, watching the darkness beyond my windows. At 2:47 a.m., I saw orange light flickering across the ceiling. The barn was on fire. I called 911 and ran outside in my boxers and boots. The flames were already through the roof, old timber burning like it was soaked in kerosene, which I realized it probably had been. The gasoline that morning was just a test run. They'd come back. The fire department saved the frame. Barely. Most of the interior was gone, my grandfather's workbench, his tools, 60 years of family history turned to ash and charred wood. Morrison came back at dawn, walked through the smoking ruins with a thermal camera. "Accelerant pattern starts inside," he said quietly, showing me the heat signature photos. "Someone either had a key or picked that lock you replaced. This wasn't random, Mr. Mitchell. This was deliberate, and whoever did it knew the building well enough to place the ignition source where it would spread fastest." I watched the smoke curl up from what used to be my grandfather's barn. Across the clearing, lights were on in Karen's house. The curtains were closed, but I could see her shadow moving behind them. Morrison followed my gaze. "Can't prove anything," he said, "but if I were you, I'd document everything. Photos, times, dates, this kind of thing. It usually escalates before it stops." At 6:30 a.m., Karen appeared at the edge of my property line. She was holding a coffee cup, standing perfectly still, watching the smoking wreckage of my barn. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood there for maybe 3 minutes, sipping her coffee before she turned and walked back to her house. I stood in the ruins and understood something I should have known from the beginning. This wasn't about property lines or surveys or legal documents. This was about winning. And Karen Westfield would burn down everything I had before she'd let me win. Linda Vasquez called me at 8 a.m. Monday morning. Her voice had that careful neutrality lawyers use when they're about to deliver bad news. Karen's cousin filed an injunction. Preston Merrick practices out of Knoxville. He's asking the court to halt your eviction notice pending independent verification of the 1952 deed. I was standing in what used to be my barn, holding a piece of charred wood that might have been part of my grandfather's tool rack. On what grounds? He's claiming the deed is questionable and that modern GPS surveys can't accurately verify boundaries established 70 years ago without the original surveyor's notes. She paused. "It's bullshit, but it'll buy them time, maybe 6 months if the judge is slow." "They're stalling." "Yes, which means they're planning something." Papers rustled on her end. "Get me certified copies of everything, the original deed, your grandfather's survey notes, any correspondence with the county from 1952. I need the cleanest paper trail possible." I drove to the county records office in town. It was a brick building from the 30s, 3 stories, with fluorescent lights that hummed and a smell like old paper and floor wax. The clerk was maybe 25, nervous energy, wouldn't make eye contact. "I need certified copies of the deed for parcel 447-3B, filed in 1952 under the name Robert Mitchell." She typed into her computer, frowned, typed more. "That parcel number isn't coming up in our system. It's 70 years old, might not be digitized yet." "Let me check the archives." She disappeared into a back room for 15 minutes. When she came back, her face was even more uncomfortable. "The original deed is temporarily unavailable." I leaned against the counter. "Unavailable how?" "Misfiled, we're looking for it." "When was it misfiled?" I don't have that information." "Who was the last person to access it?" She glanced toward an office in the back corner, door closed. "I really can't say, privacy regulations." I followed her gaze. Through the frosted glass, I could see a name plate, Donald Westfield, County Assessor. "Is Mr. Westfield available?" "He's on medical leave, started last Thursday." Thursday, 3 days after I'd shown the police my survey, 2 days before the injunction was filed. I drove home and spent an hour on my laptop. Donald Westfield had worked for the county for 19 years, married to Karen's sister in 2003, 2 kids, both in college. Access to every land record, survey, and deed filed in the county since 1847. His desk had a framed photo. I'd seen it through the window. Donald and Karen at a family barbecue, both holding beers and smiling at the camera. The photo was recent. Karen wore the same white pantsuit she'd worn when she showed up at my house. Medical leave, right when the original deed went missing. I called Linda. Karen's brother-in-law works in the county records office. The deed disappeared last Thursday, same day he went on medical leave. She was quiet for a moment. I'll file a complaint with the county clerk and request a full audit of the archives. But Jack, if that deed is really gone, we're going to have a problem. I have copies. Copies aren't the same as originals, not in court, not for a 70-year-old property dispute. That afternoon, Preston Merrick sent a settlement offer via email. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. $250,000. In exchange, I would surrender all boundary claims and acknowledge that Meadowbrook's 2016 survey was accurate. Linda called it insultingly low. The 12 acres they'd built on were worth at least $1.8 million at current market rates. They were offering 14 cents on the dollar and expecting me to take it. I declined in writing. That night someone slashed all 4 tires on my truck. I'd parked it behind the house, 30 yards from my bedroom window, and I didn't hear a thing. Just woke up at 6 a.m. to find the Chevy sitting on its rims, rubber split open in neat diagonal cuts. The security camera I'd installed after the barn fire caught a figure in a dark hoodie, but the face was obscured. 5'8", maybe 5'9". The person walked with a slight limp, favoring the left leg. I thought about the HOA meeting I'd watched through the community center windows. One of the board members, Gerald Finch, late 60s, angry face, had been using a cane, left leg, hip replacement probably. Deputy Carver took the report. Behind him, a woman in plainclothes introduced herself as Detective Ramirez, 30-something, dark hair pulled back, eyes that didn't miss anything. You filed 4 reports in 3 weeks, she said, flipping through a folder. Vandalism, arson, harassment, now destruction of property. You seeing a pattern, Mr. Mitchell? You tell me. I'm asking if you have any idea who might want to hurt you. I gestured toward Meadowbrook. Take your pick. 14 families who just found out they're living on land they don't own. She closed the folder. Without evidence, it's just bad luck. How much bad luck before it becomes a pattern? She didn't answer, just handed me her card and told me to call if anything else happened. Something else happened 2 days later. I found a note in my mailbox. No envelope, just a piece of paper folded twice, handwritten in neat block letters, drop this or it gets worse. I called Ramirez. She came out, photographed the note, bagged it for prints. Could be anyone, she said. No signature, no specific threats, hard to prosecute. Someone's trying to intimidate me into dropping a legal property claim. Can you prove that? I couldn't, so I did the next best thing. I went to the gun safe in my bedroom closet and pulled out my grandfather's Remington 870 shotgun. 12 gauge, wood stock worn smooth from 60 years of use. He taught me to shoot with this gun when I was 14, dove hunting in the fields behind the barn that was now a pile of charred timber. I cleaned it, oiled it, loaded it with buckshot, and kept it leaning against the wall next to my bed. That same night, my well water turned brown, then gray, then it stopped coming out of the tap entirely. The well company sent someone the next morning. He pulled the cover off the wellhead, lowered a test kit, and came back up looking grim. You've got bleach in your water table, a lot of it. Somebody dumped maybe 5-6 gallons straight down the well shaft. Can you fix it? We'll have to flush the entire system, then re-drill if the contamination spread. Looking at $8,000, maybe $10,000. I stood there in my yard, staring at the wellhead my grandfather had drilled in 1953, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't vandalism anymore. This was systematic, calculated. Someone was methodically destroying everything that kept me functional on this property, my barn, my truck, my water, making it impossible for me to stay. My phone rang, unknown number, I answered. Heavy breathing, then a click. It rang again 10 minutes later, same thing. 5 more calls over the next 2 hours, never any words, just breathing and silence. At 11 p.m., I found an envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, hand-delivered. Inside was a photograph. Me grocery shopping at the food city in town. The photo was taken from across the parking lot, zoomed in tight on my face. Tuesday afternoon, 3 days ago. I remembered that trip. I'd bought coffee and bread and spent maybe 15 minutes inside. Someone had followed me, photographed me, wanted me to know I was being watched. I looked across the clearing toward Karen's house. The lights were off, but I knew she was there. The shotgun suddenly felt necessary instead of paranoid. The woman approached me in the hardware store on a Wednesday afternoon. I was buying new locks for my doors, the third set in 2 weeks, when she appeared next to me in the aisle, pretending to examine deadbolts. "Mr. Mitchell," her voice was quiet, careful, "I'm Diane Cho. I live at 47 Meadowbrook Circle." I recognized the address from Linda's list, one of the 14 houses on my land. I didn't say anything, just waited. "Can we talk? Not here. Maybe the coffee shop down the street." She was 58, maybe 60. Professional clothes, architect's precision in the way she held herself. Her hands weren't shaking. She didn't look afraid. 20 minutes later, we sat in a corner booth at Mountain Grounds, both of us drinking black coffee neither of us wanted. "Karen lied to us," Diane said, "about the boundary survey. I did my own research after you sent those letters, pulled the original plats from 1952, compared them to the 2016 filing. The developer, Richard Westfield, Karen's late husband, used a surveyor who wasn't even licensed in Tennessee." I sipped the coffee. It was terrible. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Karen's pushing the HOA to pool funds for a lawsuit. Mandatory assessment, $15,000 per household. Some of us can't afford that, and some of us don't think we should be paying for her mistakes." She pulled out her phone, showed me an email chain. "There's resistance growing. 6 families want to negotiate with you directly, fair lease terms or a reasonable buyout. Karen controls the board for now, but people are asking questions." Diane scrolled through more emails. "Did you know her husband left her $2.3 million in debt when he died? The development company went bankrupt, but Richard had personally guaranteed the loans. Karen's been 1 bad month away from foreclosure since 2019. That explained some things. The desperation, the escalation. Karen wasn't just fighting for pride, she was fighting to keep her house, her status, everything she had left. She needs this dispute to go away," Diane continued. "If the truth comes out that her husband built on land he didn't own and she's known about it for years, she could face fraud charges, lose everything." I set down my coffee. "What do you want from me?" "Time and fairness. Most of us didn't know about the boundary issue. We bought our homes in good faith. We are victims here too." She met my eyes. "Work with us, not Karen. Let her hang herself." I drove home thinking about what she'd said. 6 families wanted to negotiate. That left 8 who were still backing Karen, still pooling money for lawyers, still willing to fight. My back door was hanging open when I pulled into the driveway. I'd locked it, I was certain. New deadbolt installed just yesterday, keys in my pocket. I grabbed the shotgun from my truck and approached slowly. The door frame was splintered around the lock. Someone had kicked it in hard enough to split the wood. Inside, my kitchen looked like a tornado had hit it, drawers pulled out and dumped, cabinets open, papers from my desk scattered across the floor. My files were gone. The copies of the deed, the survey maps, Linda's legal documents, everything I'd kept in the desk drawer. The backup hard drive I'd hidden in the freezer was still there, but they'd taken every piece of paper. I called 911. Detective Ramirez showed up with a crime scene tech who dusted for prints and photographed the damage. "Nothing valuable stolen?" Ramirez asked, walking through the mess. "Legal documents, property records." "You have backups?" "Safety deposit box in town." She nodded, made notes. "We'll process the scene, but without witnesses." She trailed off. The subtext was clear. We both knew who did this, and we both knew I couldn't prove it. After they left, I spent 2 hours cleaning up and reinforcing the door. The sun was setting when I finished. I was exhausted, hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks. I took the truck into town the next morning for an oil change, routine maintenance, something normal. The mechanic, guy named Ray, mid-50s, ran the shop his father had opened in 1974, called me into the bay 20 minutes later. "Jack, when's the last time you had your brakes serviced?" "I don't know, 6 months. He pointed under the truck. "Your brake line's been cut. Clean slice right here, not wear and tear. Somebody did this deliberately." I stared at the severed line, at the brake fluid dripping onto the shop floor. I'd driven that truck down Highway 441 yesterday, mountain road, sharp curves, steep grades. If the brakes had failed on one of those turns. "You're lucky you didn't crash," Ray said quietly. I filed another police report. Ramirez came to the shop, photographed the brake line, asked the same questions she always asked. I gave the same answers I always gave. That night I pulled the trail camera footage I'd set up after the barn fire. Motion activated, infrared, hidden in a tree overlooking my driveway. I'd checked it every few days, but hadn't caught anything useful until now. 3 a.m., 2 nights before the brake line was cut. A figure crossing my property, moving fast, carrying something that looked like bolt cutters. The infrared made everything green and ghostly, but I could make out details. 6 feet tall, athletic build, expensive jacket. Preston Merrick, Karen's lawyer cousin. I froze the frame, zoomed in. Definitely him. Same jacket he'd worn in court papers Linda had shown me. Same walk, confident, entitled. I called Linda, sent her the footage. "This is good," she said, "really good. This puts him on your property at 3 a.m. with tools, combined with the brake line evidence. Can we arrest him?" "I'll forward it to Detective Ramirez. But Jack, be careful. If Preston's willing to cut your brake lines, he's willing to do worse." I already knew that. What I didn't know was how much worse it could get. I found out the next morning. Another envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, another photograph inside. This one was taken through my bedroom window. I was asleep in bed, face visible on the pillow. The timestamp in the corner read 11:34 p.m. last night. Someone had been standing outside my house in the dark, close enough to photograph me sleeping through the glass. I called Ramirez immediately. She came out with 2 other detectives and a K-9 unit. They searched my property for 3 hours, found boot prints under my bedroom window, size 11, men's hiking boots, and photographed everything. "We are taking this seriously now," Ramirez said. "This crosses the line from vandalism into stalking and criminal menacing. I'm going to recommend increased patrols in your area." "What about Karen, Preston?" "We need more than trail camera footage and boot prints. We need something that directly connects them to these acts." She hesitated. "But between you and me, watch your back. People have been killed over property disputes worth a lot less than what you're sitting on." I spent that night in my kitchen with every light in the house off, shotgun across my lap, watching the darkness outside my windows. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow looked like someone moving through the trees. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Just a photo, no words. It showed my house from the road. Taken tonight, I could see my truck in the driveway, the new motion sensor light I'd installed yesterday. I was being watched, right now. I grabbed the shotgun and went to the window. The clearing between my house and Meadowbrook was dark and empty, but somewhere out there, someone was holding a phone, taking pictures, waiting. I thought about Diane Cho's words, "Karen needs this dispute to go away." And I thought about Preston Merrick's bolt cutters, the cut brake line, the photograph of me sleeping. This wasn't about property anymore. This was about survival. And only one of us was going to walk away. I called Detective Ramirez at 7 a.m. Thursday morning with a lie that might save my life. "I found it," I told her, "the original 1952 deed. My grandfather had a safe I didn't know about, hidden in the basement foundation, the deeds inside perfectly preserved. There was no safe, no deed in my basement, but I needed to know who was desperate enough to come for it. "Don't touch it," Ramirez said immediately. "Don't tell anyone else. I'll be there in an hour with evidence technicians." Too late. I already called my lawyer and posted about it on the Meadowbrook Community Facebook page. Figured people should know the truth is coming out. Silence on her end. Then, "Jesus, Jack, you just painted a target on yourself." "I know, that's why I'm calling you." She understood immediately. "You're setting a trap." "I'm tired of being hunted. Time to see who comes hunting." We spent the rest of the morning preparing. Ramirez brought 2 plainclothes officers and enough surveillance equipment to monitor a drug cartel. Cameras in the trees, motion sensors on the driveway, audio recorders in my basement. They set up an observation post in my attic with a clear view of the house and the clearing toward Meadowbrook. "You stay visible," Ramirez instructed. "Act normal, we'll be watching." I spent the afternoon on my porch, drinking coffee, pretending to read a book. Across the clearing, I could see activity at Karen's house. Cars coming and going, people on her porch, an emergency meeting, probably, planning their next move. The sun set at 8:17. I went inside, turned on the lights in every room, made myself visible through the windows. Ramirez and her team went dark in the attic. At 11:30, the motion sensors triggered. Someone was coming up my driveway on foot, moving fast. Ramirez's voice crackled in my earpiece. "Single individual, male, approximately 6 feet. He's carrying something." I watched through the kitchen window. A figure emerged from the shadows. Donald Westfield, Karen's brother-in-law, the county assessor who'd been on medical leave. He was carrying a crowbar and moving with purpose toward my basement window. "Let him commit," Ramirez whispered. "We need him inside." Donald jimmied the window open and dropped into my basement. I heard him moving around below, opening doors, searching. The audio recorders caught everything: his breathing, his footsteps, the sound of him prying at the foundation stones looking for a safe that didn't exist. Ramirez gave the signal. Officers moved in from 3 directions, flashlights blazing. Donald tried to run, but made it maybe 10 feet before they tackled him in my yard. He broke in under an hour. Sitting in an interrogation room with his lawyer present, hands shaking, Donald told them everything. Karen had ordered him to destroy the original 1952 deed, paid him $5,000 to make it disappear from the county archives. When that wasn't enough, when I kept pushing with surveys and lawyers, she told him to do whatever it takes to stop me. The break-in tonight was supposed to be his final solution. Find the deed, destroy it, make sure no original documentation existed. "She said you'd back down if there was no proof," Donald told Detective Ramirez, voice shaking. "She said it was just paperwork. Nobody would get hurt." "What about the barn fire?" Ramirez asked. "The cut-break lines." Donald's face went white. "I didn't know about that. That wasn't me. I just took the deed and—" He stopped, realizing he'd confessed to a felony. His testimony was enough for a search warrant. They hit Karen's house at 6 a.m. Friday morning. I watched from my porch as police cars surrounded her colonial, officers in tactical gear entering with a battering ram. Karen came out in handcuffs 20 minutes later, still in her bathrobe, screaming about harassment and illegal searches. They found my stolen legal documents in her home office. The surveyor stakes I'd had pulled from the creek, cleaned and hidden in her garage. A burner phone with text messages coordinating the vandalism, messages to Preston Merrick, to Gerald Finch, to 3 other HOA board members. And in her award-winning rose garden, buried 18 inches deep in carefully maintained soil, they found something else. The original county land surveys from 1952, 23 documents wrapped in plastic, dirt-stained but intact. Karen had buried them there years ago, probably right after her husband's development company went bankrupt. Evidence she'd known about the boundary fraud from the beginning. Preston Merrick was arrested at his law office in Knoxville. Gerald Finch, The board member with the limp who'd slashed my tires turned himself in that afternoon and agreed to testify against Karen in exchange for immunity. The case fell apart like wet cardboard. Karen's new lawyer, court-appointed, since Preston was now a co-defendant, offered a deal within 72 hours. Karen would plead guilty to vandalism, conspiracy to commit arson, evidence tampering, and filing false police reports. She'd accept a restraining order, pay restitution for damages, and relinquish all claims to the disputed land. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue a civil lawsuit for the $63,000 in damages her campaign had cost me. Linda Vasquez laid out the options in her office. You could take her to civil court, probably win, bankrupt her completely, she paused, or you could take the deal, get your property clear, and move on with your life. I thought about my grandfather, about the farmhouse he'd built with his own hands, about 60 years of family history and what he would have wanted. Take the deal, I said. Karen pled guilty on a Tuesday morning in October. The judge gave her 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and a $50,000 fine. She had 60 days to vacate her house. The other 13 homeowners, the ones who hadn't known about the fraud, were a different story. Diane Cho organized a meeting at the community center. No Karen, no board members, just families trying to figure out how to keep their homes. I sat in the back and listened to their proposals. Some wanted to negotiate individual leases. Others suggested a collective buyout fund where they'd pool resources to purchase the 12 acres at fair market value. We know this isn't your fault, one woman said, looking directly at me, but it's not ours either. We're just asking for fairness. It took 6 weeks to work out the details. Diane handled most of the negotiations. Turned out she wasn't just an architect, she was damn good with contracts. The homeowners formed an LLC, secured financing through a local bank, and offered $1.6 million for the disputed land. Fair market value, clean sale, everyone keeps their homes. I accepted. Used some of the money to rebuild my barn, same design my grandfather had used, same cedar timber, but with modern fire suppression systems. Donated $50,000 to the Pine Ridge Volunteer Fire Department. Put the rest in investments. Karen moved out of Meadowbrook on a gray morning in November. I watched from my porch as the moving truck pulled away from her colonial. She didn't look back. Preston Merrick was disbarred and sentenced to 18 months for conspiracy and destruction of evidence. Gerald Finch got probation. Donald Westfield lost his job and his pension. Meadowbrook held elections for a new HOA board in December. Diane Cho won the presidency unanimously. Her first official act was to repeal the architectural review codes and dissolve half the violations committee. Her second act was to plant a row of white pines along the property line, the real one, marked by new steel survey stakes that would last 100 years. I was on my porch when she walked over with a thermos of coffee and 2 mugs. Thought you might want company, she said. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the hills my grandfather had loved enough to buy, to build on, to protect. Think it's really over? Diane asked. I looked at the new barn, at the survey stakes, at Meadowbrook, where families were decorating for Christmas and kids were playing in yards without fear. Yeah, I said, I think it is. She raised her mug to good neighbors. I clinked mine against hers and better fences. Turned out my grandfather had been right all along. Good fences make good neighbors. But good surveys make better ones.